Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're putting a massive magnifying glass up to one of the most acclaimed television shows of the modern era. The exact show that basically made us all obsessed with quiet luxury and corporate backstabbing. But look, we aren't here to do a standard recap. You already know the plot. Instead, we are setting up a clinical, highly structured, and honestly a truly fascinating look into the psychology of the ultra-wealthy. We're going to break down the exact mental frameworks driving these characters, using the patterns we see on screen to really understand human behavior when it's pushed to the absolute extreme.
Right out of the gate, I want to pose a paradox directly to you. On the surface, the lives of the Roy family look completely ridiculous, right? I mean, they're flying private helicopters out to mega yachts in the Mediterranean. There is absolutely nothing at risk for them materially. They could literally walk away at any second and live in absolute untouchable luxury for the rest of their lives. So why the heck does it feel like no one in this family is ever actually at peace? Why do characters with literally every conceivable resource live like they are constantly standing on the edge of complete annihilation?
Okay, let's dive into this. The answer to that paradox is a massive collision between external abundance and internal scarcity. It is so easy to watch them and just say, well, they're rich, so their problems aren't real. But psychologically, their problems are incredibly real. They just aren't the problems they actually think they're solving. You see, they aren't fighting for money or survival. They are fighting for identity, for validation, and for control. Their external world is completely limitless, but their internal world, it is entirely starved.
To really unpack this, we're doing a highly organized psychological autopsy today. First, we'll examine the illusion of wealth. Then we'll run some profiles in psychological scarcity. After that, we'll look at surviving the power system, chart the 4 seasons of chaos, and finally, wrap things up with some real-world lessons.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the illusion of wealth. We really need to diagnose the overarching disease infecting basically everyone in this fictional universe.
So, the root cause of this disease? It's a little something called internal scarcity. This is a psychological condition where you're operating from the deep-seated belief that I don't have enough unless I win. And it doesn't matter if you have billions in the bank. We see this perfectly when these billionaires are literally tearing each other apart over trivial slights, or when a character steals cheap batteries from a bodega just to feel a quick rush of control. You know, money puts a roof over your head for sure, but it absolutely cannot solve internal problems like a lack of emotional security, trust, or knowing who you actually are. When you lack those internal foundations, you will manipulate and destroy the relationships around you just to try and fill that void. And that is exactly why the conflict in this family is never, ever actually about the dollars and cents.
Moving right along to Section 2, Profiles and Psychological Scarcity. Let's do a rapid-fire clinical profiling of the Roy family to see exactly how these specific traits mask their deep, underlying trauma.
We've got to start with the patriarch, right? Logan Roy. Is he decisive? Yes. A strong leader and brilliant strategically? Absolutely. But his leadership is entirely rooted in fear-driven control. I mean, think about how he forces his top executives to literally crawl on the ground in a humiliating game of boar on the floor just to test their loyalty. He has a complete inability to trust anyone, his own kids included, and he suppresses his emotions to a frankly terrifying degree. Look, Logan could have built a healthy succession plan decades ago. He really could have empowered his children. Instead, he chose to dominate them because separating his identity from his power was psychologically impossible for the guy.
Because for Logan, everything boils down to one incredibly destructive core belief. If I'm not in control, I'm nothing. That's exactly why he can't ever just step down. In his mind, stepping down isn't some peaceful retirement on a beach. It is the literal death of his identity.
And you can see how this sickness just bleeds right into the next generation with Kendall Roy. Now, Kendall is intelligent, he's highly capable in modern business, and honestly, genuinely visionary at times. But he suffers from severe emotional instability. One minute, he is ruthlessly gutting a media startup with surgical precision, and the literal next, he is spiraling into severe addiction. His visionary capabilities are constantly derailed by his agonizing, desperate need for his father's approval.
Kendall's entire psychological framework operates on a single, exhausting premise. If I win, I'm worthy. A much healthier path for Kendall would have been to just commit to a clear identity outside the company, right? Do some inner work. But because he believes that CEO chair is the only thing that grants him worth as a human being, he is completely trapped in this endless cycle of striving, betraying his loved ones, and ultimately crashing.
Next up is Shiv Roy.
She is razor sharp, highly strategic, and projects this fierce independence. But man, beneath that armor, she completely avoids vulnerability and leans incredibly heavily into manipulation. Shiv uses her intellect like a heavy shield. She is constantly maneuvering to keep the upper hand. She even pauses on her own wedding day to negotiate corporate leverage. And why? Because she is absolutely terrified of letting her guard down.
She is driven by the constant fear that, if I show weakness, I lose. This deep-seated paranoia just totally prevents her from building the long-term trust and honest communication she actually desperately needs. She treats every single relationship, especially her marriage, like a chess match, always making sure she's never the one left exposed. And finally, we have Roman Roy. Roman is highly intuitive and incredibly socially aware. Honestly, he can read a room better than almost anyone else. But he flat out refuses to take anything seriously. He consistently self-sabotages right when he is on the verge of success. Whether it's rushing a satellite rocket launch that violently explodes or blowing up a major deal, he masks his crippling insecurity with dark, deflective humor. His natural intuition is just constantly blocked by his utter refusal to face any kind of emotional discomfort.
His defense mechanism is ridiculously simple. If I don't take myself seriously, no one can hurt me. It's a bizarre survival tactic that keeps him alive in the Shark Tank, sure, but it completely prevents him from taking real ownership of his life and building any true internal confidence. Okay, let's pivot slightly. For Section 3, Surviving the Power System, let's look at the outsiders who stepped into this mess. Now, what's really interesting about Tom Wambsgans and Greg Hirsch is that they aren't Roys by blood. They enter from the outside, but they demonstrate a very clear, undeniable pattern. Adapting to absolute power requires compromising your values. They completely trade their moral compasses for proximity to the throne. And notice how they start treating those below them with the exact same cruelty they endure from those above them? It really proves that toxic environments will completely shape your behavior if you let them. They adapt to the exact same scarcity mindset that plagues the Roys. Which brings us to Section 4, 4 Seasons of Chaos. Let's escalate our view a bit and track how this psychological disease progresses across the entire story. This progression maps perfectly to how a lack of internal stability inevitably scales into total systemic collapse over time. In Season 1, Logan's health falters, sparking a ruthless battle that proves instability at the top creates chaos everywhere else. By Season 2, with the massive cruise scandals hitting, trust completely erodes, and strategy just degrades into pure manipulation. Then in Season 3, the fragmentation is complete. The family wages a full-blown civil war, proving that unresolved issues compound exponentially. And finally, Season 4, the illusion collapses entirely. Reality sets in, showing us the ultimate pattern. You simply cannot avoid internal truth forever. All right, Section 5, the real-world lessons. We've dissected all the fictional drama, but let's intentionally slow the pace down here and pivot to some actionable real-world philosophy. First off, what should a healthy family actually have done? Well, the alternative paths are super simple on paper. Define roles clearly, separate the family dynamics from the business dynamics, intentionally build trust systems, and above all, prioritize emotional health. The ultimate irony here? Any basic management consultant can hand you this list, but actually executing it requires the exact emotional stability and health that these characters fundamentally lacked. So, the crucial point is, how does this apply to you? First, remember that having more resources without internal stability just equals more chaos. Second, validation is a losing game. Tying your worth as a human being to winning means you will never, ever feel secure. Third, recognize the difference between control and power. Control, like Logan's, restricts and suffocates people, while true power stabilizes and empowers them. And finally, family patterns don't just magically disappear with success. They scale up and magnify. And this brings us to the real overarching thesis. This source material isn't just depicting rich people problems. That is a massive misunderstanding. It's actually depicting human problems, your problems, my problems, just amplified by immense wealth and influence when essential inner work is ignored. Having money without psychological growth, it merely acts as a giant magnifying glass for your existing flaws. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to close out our analysis. Peace is not purchased. It's built internally. No matter how much you have, if the foundation inside is fractured, the castle outside will inevitably crumble. So ask yourself, are you building a castle or are you just reinforcing a cage? Keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.